Hello students, today we will discuss John Keats, his poetry, major characteristics of his poetry, Keats as a poet, and especially Hellenism that we found in his poetry. As you know, John Keats is a sensuous and pictorial artist par excellence and belongs to the galaxy of stars known as the Romantics in English poetry. Keats, with a remarkable balance between Romanticism and Classicism, and with his abundant love for beauty, represents a unique phenomenon in English Romanticism. We find the real Keats in his odes, haunted by a poignant awareness of the transitoriness of worldly pleasure and beauty. Keats is indeed a poet's poet who profoundly influenced Tennyson, the Pre-Raphaelites, and many others. Sensuousness is a prominent passion with Keats, who longed for a life of sensation rather than of thought. For Matthew Arnold, Keats is enchantingly and abundantly sensuous. No doubt, all great poets, as Wordsworth observes, have an organic sensibility, but Keats is more sensuous than others. He satisfies all the five senses, writes only when his whole being is stilled by some sense impressions. He simultaneously possesses a unique gift of communicating his sensuousness to others through concrete images and word pictures. Keats not only luxuriates in physical pleasures, but also enjoys the pleasure provided by particular mental states. Ode to Nightingale opens with a mood of lethargy and a condition of utter listlessness in which all mental and physical activities are suspended. To quote from the poem, as the poet says, "My heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk." Keats' sensuousness becomes a spiritual passion in his later poetry. His senses are transfigured by imagination, becomes so creative as to make the loveliness of the real world look still lovelier. Keats is a great worshipper of beauty. Beauty for him is a thing of joy forever, as he said in his odes. Keats' conception of beauty in the beginning is entirely sensuous. The poet moves from mere physical beauty to spiritual and ideal beauty. Perfection is with him an overwhelming passion, and he believes in the permanence of beautiful things, art, and that stand as a guidance for human generations for long. Keatsian philosophy can well be described as there is nothing real but the beautiful and nothing beautiful but the real. Ode was the forte for Keats. All aspects of Keatsian art, including his love for fine phrases, habit of loading every rift of his subject with awe, power of word painting, use of suggestive images, epithets, his fine sense for music and melody, find a rich and full expression in his odes. Negative capability that we find in his odes is a quality which enables the poet to merge his identity completely with the contemplated object. Keats himself defines it as one who has the negative capability is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without an irritable reaching after fact and reason. In his Ode to Autumn and many other poems, we find this negative capability, and in every line we experience that. Keats is generally known as an escapist for ignoring the realities of life, and he finds Hellenism as an escape from the sordid realities of life. Hellenism means a love of Greek art, literature, culture, and way of life. Keats has an inborn love for the Greek spirit, the religion of joy and beauty. Shelley calls Keats a Greek. Keats has an essential kinship with the thought of Greece. Keats owes his Hellenism to Greek sculpture, reference of Greek art in the Elizabethan literature, translations of the Greek masterpieces. Keats' mind is saturated with Greek literature and mythology, and thus he chooses Greek stories and legends for his poetry. His poems like Endymion, Hyperion, Lamia, Ode on a Grecian Urn have themes borrowed from the Greeks. The Grecian urn is a monument of the poet's power of entering imaginatively into another world, that is the Hellenic world of beauty, love, festivity and ritual. Moreover, the ode form adopted and perfected by him is typically a Greek verse form. There are countless allusions to Greek legends and stories in Keats' poems. Ode to a Nightingale, based on a classical subject, is full of references to dryads, goddess Flora, Bacchus and his parts. A clear tone of enjoyment in these allusions shows how Greek mythology had really taken possession of his mind. He feels its charm and regards it as, to use Rossetti's words, ever vital embodiment of ideas of beauty in forms of beauty. The Greek temper of Keats is revealed particularly by his joy in the beauty of nature. Like Greeks, Keats takes a sensuous, childlike pleasure in the forms, colors, scents, sounds of nature. Like the Greeks, he too personifies various activities and forms of nature. The second stanza of Ode to Autumn, where the autumn season is personified as a gleaner, reaper, winnower and a cedar maker, is noteworthy in this context. Here, his personification of nature has the vividness and solidity of Greek sculpture. He writes, "And sometimes, like a gleaner, thou dost keep steady thy laden head across a brook." In Keatsian poetry, every tree comes to have its dryads, every wood its fauns, every spring its nymphs. Keats addresses the nightingale as light-winged dryad of the trees. Keats resembles the Greeks in his vivid sense of joyous, multitudinous life of nature. The ancients had a zest for life in nature, simultaneously loved the serenity, quiet of pastoral life, as effectively portrayed by Keats also in Grecian art. In fact, his attitude towards nature has that simplicity and curiosity and that mood of joy and worship which characterized the Greeks. It seems that Hellenic spirit was reincarnated in Keats. He imbibed from Greek sculpture the classical discipline, simplicity, austerity. No doubt, Keats, being a romantic, often surprises us by his fine access and believes in loading every rift of his subject with ore, but at times he achieves the clearness of outline, directness, restraint, austerity, polish, finish of the classics. Please mark these adjectives. He often creates, particularly in his odes, the status quo effect so peculiar to the classical art. Sidney Colvin calls the Ode to Autumn as the most Greek thing. He further adds, in middle stanza, the touches of literary art and Greek personifications have exquisite congruity and ease. Keats achieves the happy combination of movement and repose which characterizes Greek art. In Ode to Melancholy, he writes, "Beauty that must die, and joy bidding adieu. The Greek note in Keats' poetry is perfectly blended with the romantic melancholy, exuberance, and reaching after the far off. Thus, in him, we find a rare combination of classicism and romanticism. Keats affects the rare union of classical discipline with romanticism. Precisely, Keats is Greek in his temperament, but he also achieves in his poetry a unique blend of Hellenism and romanticism, which makes him all the more memorable. Keats' Ode to Autumn is the best creation, in which there is no looking before and after, no pining for what is not, but a complete dedication to the enjoyment of present. His Ode on Melancholy is indeed a great contribution to English literature. The ode, composed in a particularly dejected mood of the poet, Keats here treats the theme of Beaumont and Milton in a manner entirely his own. His Ode to a Nightingale is one of the masterpieces of English literature. The general critical opinion appreciates this ode as among the greatest glories of English poetry. His Ode on a Grecian Urn is a memorable piece of art in which Keats touches the zenith of his imagination. The ode is an epitome of beauty, preaches the theme of permanence of art in this unstable world. So, studying Keats is really a feast for literature lovers. He has his philosophy in his poetry, his ethics, his sense of beauty, his aestheticism, his romanticism. Keats is always interpreted as to be an escapist. He celebrates some of our Hindu philosophy, no doubt, only instinctively. His increasing awareness of life and its problems in his later poetry restrains him from seeking refuge in mere sensuous aspect of beauty and places him on a spiritual plane from where he can clearly see the real life. Thus, to interpret Keats merely as an escapist is to underrate his real ability and overlook his maturer poetry. Keats' poetry represents both the beauty of form and beauty of substance. Keats is undoubtedly a poet par excellence of the pain of joy and the joy of pain.